This is the grave of your great-great-grandfather Solomon, who before Jesse Owens or Rosa Parks broke the color barrier by joining the 135th United States Colored Troop and marched with Sherman's army in the year of 1865.
Was he a slave, Grandma?
He was born in Elbert County, Georgia, but was sold to Mr. Jones in Burke County, Georgia, when he was just 10 years old. He worked in the cotton fields for his master, lived a life of most slaves on a big plantation. It was a very hard life.
Was he married and have children?
He did marry in the slave tradition, but he didn't have any children. His wife's name was Miss Wilby. She was from the same plantation, but before they could have children, the War of the Rebellion broke out, and there was uncertainty. General Sherman's Union Army has burned Atlanta and is on the move toward us. Grandpa Solomon was sent to deliver honey to Mr. Emon's place, where he met a straggler who tells him that he saw about 8,000 troops marching on the road coming toward us. Grandpa Solomon waits on the road to see the Union troops come past him. He tells the family that there were about 10-mile supply wagons that followed at least 600 ambulances. It took hours for all to pass. Grandpa Solomon lived on Judge Jones's plantation. He was a heavy-set man, and he had over 60 slaves who lived in a number of small log cabins and frame house on the farm. General Sherman and his staff rode up to the front of the big house where Sherman was to stay the night. Later that night, after dinner, Solomon heard General Sherman explain to his friend,
"Free if you choose, and deserve it."
Was Grandpa scared?
No, Grandpa Solomon joined the Union soldiers to work for his freedom.
Did he get a gun? Did he get a uniform?
No, son. He told us that he helped the troops pull up the railroad tracks and bind them into pretzels so they could not be used again. Come sit here. You need to hear the Army story that was passed down for the last 150 years. Grandpa Solomon tells that when Sherman's army marched away from the Joneses' plantation, Solomon joined them. While in Savannah, he enlisted in the Pioneer Corps Company B, later to become the 135th USCT. They were all given shovels, spades, and axes. Grandpa Solomon tells how they marched to Thunderbolt outside Savannah and boarded a boat to Beaufort, South Carolina.
Could Grandpa swim?
I don't know, but I heard they were sick the whole trip. I brought you here to show you Grandpa Solomon's pension record. In 1890, they recorded his words and the words of others that surrounded him.
That was so long ago.
That's true, but it's important to save the story of our family and the man who changed our world by becoming a freedom seeker. Now, read his own account of the war. The weather is so bad, the roads are impassable. The enemy was skirmishing all day with us as we corduroyed the roads in order to move the supplies. We sometimes had to work at night in order to move the troops and the wagons during the daylight. The Salkehatchie Swamp was one of the biggest challenges as the enemy was on the other side of the causeway that crosses the swamp. The winter of '65 was bitter cold, and the swamp had an inch of ice on the top. The enemy opened fire as we started to cross. A sergeant of Company A was killed. Our division lost about 200 men. The enemy was in retreat, but several wounded had to spend the night in the swamp as it was impossible to find them in the dark. We had to corduroy the roads and repair the bridge over the Salkehatchie Swamp and resume the march. Corduroying the roads required us to cut the timbers by laying them across the road and adding soil to the top for the train not to sink in the mud that in some places was 2 feet deep. Columbia was our next goal. General Sherman's intent was not to burn the city, but to strip it clean. We marched through steady rain, but our rubber coverings couldn't keep out the wet, which left us soaked by evening. Yet we are cheerful, full of unquenchable spirit, ready to march the next day with the help of our continuous singing.
Grandma, where is Columbia, South Carolina?
Here is a map. You can see the places Grandpa Solomon marched with Sherman's army.
Who is John Dearden?
He is another soldier who was in the same Company B with Grandpa Solomon. Grandpa writes that they are getting closer to Goldsboro and they have not had real food in weeks. Most of the time, they have only had hardtack and coffee. They have been in so many rough timbered forests and swamps that some men don't even have shoes and their pants are torn above the knee. Some have lost their caps and are bareheaded. John tells us,
We have had to sleep on the ground without a blanket, but the weather is warming.
North Carolina is the quicksand state, and that sometimes we have had to pick up the wagons and carry them as they get bogged down in the swamps. Grandpa has another soldier's deposition in his file. Silas Cogdale said that he is Solomon's bunkmate and John's cousin. He says that Solomon has been sick, but he did not go to the hospital wagon. Grandpa mentioned that Philip Fult and Jacques Sherrard are also in his company.
We now occupy Goldsboro, all 120,000 of us. We get to eat and rest for a while. Our spirits are high, and we are singing at night around the campfire. Some of us are learning to read as free men. At 5 o'clock in the morning, we were stripped naked and examined by the army surgeon. My name was called to step forward, and with no fanfare, we took the oath to serve in the United States Army as the 135th USCT. With a smile on my face, I was given my blue uniform. At the campfire that night, we sang and thanked God for the chance to fight for freedom. We spent the next few weeks drilling and drilling to become a regiment. We leave Goldsboro following Johnston, but this time we leave our picks and shovels behind and march shoulder to shoulder in our regiment. We march with pride in our blue uniforms and shiny new shoes. Johnston surrenders. Our beloved President Lincoln has been killed. We start our final march to Washington City through Virginia, where in the spring heat we wait for our orders.
I think that I'm going to read you an eyewitness account of May 24th, 1865.
A triumph for the 135th, Colonel Oscar L. Jackson of the 63rd Ohio. He tells it best.
On the morning of the 24th of May, 1865, there are four long blue bending lines winding along the uneven hillside headed for Columbia. At 8 o'clock, we crossed the long bridge which spans the Potomac and into the city. At 10 o'clock, we moved down Pennsylvania Avenue, close column of company, in perfect silence, with music from the bands, marching with military precision, taking our long swinging steps, and we soon captured the hearts of the great throngs of people. The ovation was widely grand. Comrades, picture in your minds one of the most beautiful streets in the world, 2 miles long and 170 feet wide, blooming in national colors and masses of people all cheering. To men who had been so long on the front lines and who emerged from the dismal swamps of the Carolinas, this change was very great and effects intoxicating. As we near the White House, we're doing our best to make a good impression upon the great leaders of the nation. As we passed the reviewing stands, the shouts and cheers were deafening. The eyes of the nation were upon us, and we felt the swelling of the hearts we never can feel again. I think that this story should be remembered and repeated over and over, so we never forget the beginning of our freedom.